I am aware that this situation may be perceived as implausible, but it is, in fact, a genuine account. I would prefer to convey this information in a more elaborate or unconventional manner, but I am unable to do so. The discovery of my wife's infidelity unfolded in a manner that was both predictable and cliched. I am employed by an automotive parts manufacturer, and my role entails the repair of damaged components. In this context, it was inevitable that I would encounter such a situation. From 9 a.m. to midnight, 5 days a week, for 8 hours, I operate one of the most antiquated machines one could imagine. I utilize safety glasses, earplugs, steel-toed boots, and a denim apron. I consistently fulfill my daily quota, and if I am fortunate, I may receive a bonus at the conclusion of the year. I reside in a modest, comfortable house with the residence has 3 bedrooms, a spouse, and 2 sons, both of whom are enrolled in primary school. After 12 years of marriage, the couple was experiencing a period of stability. However, today, there are 5 stations that are responsible for assembling the pads. These stations operate using compressed air, and they have been functioning without any issues for 8 years. The compressed air system froze, preventing the operation of all our machines. The air must be absolutely dry. It is filtered and dehydrated by automatic equipment that is designed to function reliably. However, tonight, the dehumidifier system was unable to release accumulated moisture. Based on my limited scientific knowledge, I understand that when moisture and high-pressure air come together, freezing occurs and everything comes to a complete halt. Rather than leaving us to wait, they sent the entire team home without pay. I would venture to say that my entire life was ruined by accumulated moisture when I opened the bedroom door and saw a large, hairy back bouncing up and down on my wife, Marcy. I instinctively turned on the overhead light when I realized Marcy was awake. "Damn it, Danny. What the hell are you doing at home?" I anticipated that she would exhibit signs of fear, remorse, and shame. Instead, she displayed a hostile and defiant attitude. I am perplexed by this unexpected turn of events. I am aware of the circumstances, yet you have chosen to respond in this manner. I am sorry that you had to witness this. However, had you returned home at the designated time, this incident would not have occurred. The individual in question would not have been present, and I would not have seen him. The large, hairy figure turned and departed. He looked at me with a grin. Marcy pulled the blanket up in an attempt to maintain her modesty. My mistake was grabbing this man when he got out of bed. He was much larger than when he had lain down. I was rewarded for my foolish enthusiasm with 2 very hard blows to the ribs. I never managed to hit him, and I lay on the floor struggling to catch my breath. I am not sure, but I think it was around this time. I was subsequently struck on the side of my head, which precipitated my hospitalization. Upon arrival at the emergency room, a medical technician proceeded to bandage my ribs. Marcy, who was seated in close proximity to the examination table, displayed a countenance that indicated her profound disquiet. Upon the technician's departure, Marcy inquired about the identity and purpose of the individual in question. I informed her that his name was Tony and that he was a friend of mine. I had invited him to my residence. "You had sexual intercourse with him. You engaged in sexual intercourse with him in our bed. Our children were sleeping just down the hall. I am aware that they would never have woken up if you hadn't caused such a commotion. I had to ask my sister to look after them so I could bring you here. I am curious as to why you are asking the same question repeatedly. We engaged in sexual intercourse. We engaged in sexual intercourse. Is that really the extent of it? It is challenging to comprehend whether this is a common occurrence or if it is an isolated incident. We have been dating for approximately 6 months, and we attempted to maintain confidentiality regarding this matter. Despite our usual practice of not visiting your residence, I was unable to secure childcare. Is this situation now resolved? This is not the conclusion of the matter. Danny, you are a commendable father and a devoted husband. However, Tony possesses exceptional sexual prowess. There is no rationale for us to terminate this arrangement simply because it has been revealed. I pledge to you that we will not meet him in this house again. It is unfair to you and the children. I am sorry, Marcy. This is unacceptable. It is now over between us. Danny, if you attempt to stop my relationship with Tony, you will regret it. You were knocked unconscious and Tony did not even break a sweat. I can assure you that it will happen again if you do or say anything to try to stop it. It is inevitable that your infidelity will become common knowledge. All of our acquaintances will be aware of your illicit relationship, and you will be perceived as an unfaithful and inferior individual. Your family will also be informed of your actions, and your colleagues will likely begin to refer to you as a cuckold. It is crucial to consider the potential consequences of your actions. Your life will become exceedingly challenging, and even your sons may turn against you. Do you not care what they think of you? Are you willing to make yourself look like a cheater just to humiliate me? I am prepared to do so if I have to, but I doubt you will take this chance. Tony thinks you are a weakling, and I believe he is correct. You will have to learn to live with it, Danny. Who is this man? Where does he work? It is not important, Danny. He is the owner of Continental Classics, a luxury car dealership on Lancaster Pike is a place that many people aspire to visit but few ever do. In this case, the aspiration is realized. Danny is a wealthy, intelligent, and sexually adept individual. He is also stronger and more skilled in hand-to-hand combat than Tony. Given these attributes, it seems an optimal decision for Tony to marry Danny. However, Tony has a child with another woman. This complicates the decision. Tony does not like children, and he is reluctant to give up his son to be with Danny. Tony's preference is to maintain the status quo. Play houseman and daddy, and Tony receives the majority of the affection. Why is it so challenging for you to comprehend this reality? I am in favor of this arrangement. You have no alternative but to accept it or face the consequences. You will be perceived as a failure by the general public. I am relocating your belongings to the guest room. I do not believe we require a shared sleeping arrangement at this juncture. I observed as Marcy rose to depart. I was gratified that she departed. I am, however, curious to know who provided childcare when I was out with Tony. Karen typically looked after the children, but on occasion, I transported them to your parents' residence. I should mention that it was Karen who introduced me to Tony. I made a mental note to thank her as Marcy left the room. The following morning, Marcy was not present at the time of my departure. I had the option of contacting someone or I had the option of taking a taxi, as the children were at school and Marcy was not at home. My personal items and clothing were stacked on the guest bed. I anticipated that Todd and Terry would have questions about these preparations. I decided to let Marcy explain everything. The process of getting my new home in order took less than an hour. Meanwhile, I was preoccupied with a multitude of thoughts. I was convinced that this was not going to end well. I commenced the process by descending to the basement and extracting my old telephone recorder. This device was only compatible with a landline, but it was the only option available to me. Marcy typically utilized her cellular phone, so I had to act swiftly to retrieve the recorder and conceal it behind some old paint cans. This initial step was challenging, but I was able to resume my professional responsibilities. I experienced some discomfort, but I was determined to avoid taking any medication. I was provided with medication, but I was not sufficiently unwell to take them and then operate the machine. Instead, I took a couple of large Tylenol tablets. Marcy had made a significant error in judgment in regard to my relationships with the men I worked with. I informed them of all that had occurred the night before. Everyone had their own interpretation of events, some of which were positive and some of which were negative. It was reassuring to know that friends would always be there when one needed them. We had an 8-hour shift ahead of us, ready to start. The shift was about to commence, and each of us was going to spend it determining how to assist in resolving the issues we had encountered. We took a break for dinner during the shift. At this juncture, I would be grateful for any suggestions. Glenn was the first to speak. He said he had no idea, but he had a cousin who was employed by the aforementioned individual. From what he understood, that person was responsible for vehicle detailing. He has a strong dislike for DeMarco. Should you require any information regarding the business premises or work schedules, he can be of assistance. This will undoubtedly be of benefit to me, Glenn. I would also suggest contacting Danny. I possess 2 shotguns and 2 pistols, which I am willing to provide to any of them. However, they are not registered, so there is no cause for concern. Thank you, Barry, but I am not sure that. His proposal was somewhat more radical than I had anticipated. "Well, that is unfortunate," Freddie said. "In that case, you may not even want to consider my idea." "Please, Freddie, enlighten us," I urged. "We are all eager to hear your proposal." Freddie's idea, but unfortunately it had to be rejected. Kyle was the only one who did not contribute, so we all just stared at him while we ate our lunches. "Do not look at me like that. I do have an idea, but it is somewhat unconventional. Please share it." The perpetrators of these crimes were required to wear pink jumpsuits, which must have been a humiliating experience. While Tony is not a child molester, he would likely be extremely embarrassed if placed in a similar situation. Could he simply remove the tracksuit? I proposed that we enter the facility, restrain him, and then spray him with pink paint. While the plan may appear spectacular, it is crucial to consider the potential consequences. If discovered, the perpetrator may be able to identify the individual responsible. Therefore, it is essential to ensure the perpetrator is rendered unconscious and secured to a chair until apprehended. The question then arises as to the most effective method of incapacitation. The use of drugs or a blunt object to strike the perpetrator may be viable options. However, it is crucial to exercise caution and ensure the safety of all parties involved. The availability of stun guns is a potential solution. However, the effectiveness of this approach may depend on the individual's proximity to the perpetrator and the ability to act swiftly and decisively. Once he is alone, how might we gain proximity without his awareness? I am unsure. I merely considered it a promising plan. The buzzer sounded, indicating the machines had resumed functioning at 4 hours of work. My nightly allotment was reduced, prompting my colleagues to contribute equally. Upon returning home, Marcy was already asleep, thankfully. I was advised to refrain from bringing the individual in question into the house. I was uncertain as to the best course of action. Many of the suggestions put forth by the boys and I were akin to school pranks. I considered the possibility of placing a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. However, I felt that such an act would not be sufficiently satisfying. By the time I arose, it was already noon. The children were at school. Subsequently, I heard Marcy walking around the house. I proceeded to shower, shave, and exit the residence. "Good morning, husband. Do you have a kiss for your wife?" She was standing at the kitchen sink with her hand on her hip and a grin on her face. I simply turned around and walked out. Her witty remark did not warrant a response from me. I required time to consume breakfast and solitude. I spent the remainder of the day engaged in leisure activities. I was attempting to determine how I could interact with my wife's romantic partner without causing significant disruption. I needed to complete my work by night's end and begin preparations. I resolved not to consume meals at home again, as it was the only time I could do so. I could spend time with the boys, but I just couldn't bring myself to consume Marcy's culinary creations anymore. Before I knew it, it was time to resume work. Everything was going fine until the dinner break. "Danny, I have a stun gun in my car. I am unsure if you can utilize it for any purpose, but at the very least, you can have it for self-defense." Defense, Kyle appeared to take pride in his actions. "It is imperative that you retrieve the item before departing for the day. Have you ever utilized that particular device? We can ascertain its efficacy through a trial." The response was a unanimous affirmation from the table. No new suggestions were forthcoming, but they were all amenable to supporting my initiative. I felt better knowing that I had friends when I returned home. Everything was fine. The night was relatively short for me, as I was working the graveyard shift. This particular schedule has an adverse effect on one's sleep patterns, particularly on weekends. I arose earlier than usual, and Todd and Terry were eager to socialize at Chuck's. Ichi's Marcy did not seem to mind at all, especially when I informed her that we would be out all day. "Danny, I require your assistance in the form of a few days' leave next week. Tony's acquaintance, Wally, will be arriving from Detroit, and we intend to embark on a 3-night, 4-night cruise to Cancun. If you are unable to do so, I would be grateful if you could ascertain whether your parents would be amenable to this arrangement. Are you intending to embark on a cruise with 2 male companions? This does not seem an appropriate course of action, even for you. I would ask you not to be discourteous, Danny. Such behavior is unbecoming. Karen and Todd will be sharing a room. They have been acquainted for approximately 2 years. I attempted to be sarcastic, but ultimately decided it was acceptable. I will certainly express gratitude to Karen later. I began the day too early to occupy myself before Chuck E. Cheese opened. We visited Hobby Hall, located next to our residence. The boys were of an age to assemble the majority of the plastic models displayed on the shelves. While the final products were not particularly impressive, they appeared to enjoy themselves. I allowed them to peruse hundreds of boxes and wonder at their leisure. I was astonished by the vast array of merchandise available for purchase at Creative Housewives. Had Marcy been interested in crafts, she might have chosen a different decoration for her home, but it was too late to change my mind. I was particularly drawn to the rows of designer spray paint, which included 6 cans of pink spray paint. While the quantity of paint was not as extensive as that available at Lowe's or Home Depot, the color was striking. This was the only place I had seen paint of that color in a can. I interpreted this as a sign and purchased all 6 cans. Todd ultimately selected the monster decoration. I selected a truck kit and Terry chose the tow truck. Prior to our departure, I was unaware that plastic tug models were available in a variety of materials. I also procured a bag of 10 large plastic cable ties, which were approximately 18 inches in length and appeared suitable for our intended activities. By this time, Chuck E. Cheese had opened, and the children consumed approximately 4 hours' worth of pizza before they became tired. We purchased a pack of inexpensive bread and proceeded to Pandora Park. The ducks consumed the bread within the first 10 minutes, but we remained for a couple more hours before heading to my parents' house. My parents expressed satisfaction with our visit. To extend an invitation for us to dine with them, Todd and Terry spent the majority of the night in front of the television. I seized this opportunity to inform my father about Marcy's circumstances. I realized that I was disclosing information about Marcy's situation to others before she had the chance to do so herself. In response, she threatened to do the same thing I did. However, this threat ultimately proved ineffective. My father reassured me that they would be there to support us and care for the boys regardless of the outcome. This assurance made it easier for me to implement my plan. I was determined to ensure the boys' safety in this situation. I contacted Marcy to inform her that we would be spending the night at my parents' residence. After a substantial breakfast at IHOP, we returned to our place of residence to find Marcy still in bed. I promptly activated the lawn mower and proceeded towards the bedrooms. Todd and Terry were eager to commence constructing their models, despite the pleasant weather conditions. On the day in question, I permitted them to proceed. I resolved to dedicate the entire day to the lawn edging and trimming that was required. The pace at which I completed the necessary tasks was not as rapid as it might have been, due in part to the frequency with which I paused to engage in conversation. I had procured high-quality hedge trimmers, but I elected to borrow them from Mike Fielding, who resides across the street. His wife, Mary, was a prominent figure in the community. I informed Mike that Marcy might engage in social activities with male acquaintances, which could result in the presence of unfamiliar vehicles outside the residence. Should this occur, it is advisable to contact the authorities. Given my occupational schedule, I may not be able to address the situation promptly. Larry Finley. I served on the board of directors of a local church and borrowed his spark plug key, apologizing for Marcy's recent erratic behavior. Larry was an even more prolific gossip than Mary Fielding. In 10 minutes, he had accumulated sufficient gossip fodder to last him a month. I did not take a lunch break and finished work at approximately 4 o'clock. At 4 p.m., after a brief period of personal hygiene, I proceeded to Rose's Cafe and ordered the most expensive item on the menu. While I am uncertain as to the veracity of this assertion, I can confirm that the meal was, in fact, quite palatable. I spent the remainder of the evening in the company of my brother, Dave, and his family. My father had already informed Dave of the circumstances. I spent the night on Dave's couch. My wife had devised an ingenious plan. She was going to force me to obey by threatening to expose me as a cuckold if I refused to condone. Furthermore, she would make my life miserable. It was an intriguing notion, yet it was riddled with inconsistencies. Less than a week later, I had already informed everyone of the situation. This appeared to negate her threat. Additionally, I was able to portray her as a more approachable individual than she typically would have been. I do not believe she anticipated any response from me. The following day, I returned home to change for work, and there was Marcy. Upon my return, I discovered Karen in a state of agitation. She informed me that I had informed the neighbors that she operated a brothel at night. I denied this, stating that I had merely informed them that she provided entertainment for men while I was at work and that they should not be concerned. However, this was not the situation at the time. I inquired as to whom else she had informed. I had decided to inform the neighbors before she did, as I believed it would be more straightforward to do so. I had not spoken to anyone. Perhaps you should inform your parents or sisters before they become aware of the rumors. It is unfortunate that you are making me appear to be unfaithful, but it seems only fair that you would want to portray me as a cuckold. I apologize, but I must go to work. I would like to spend some time with the children before I leave. Glenn had the most encouraging news of the night. The Continental Classics will be closing on Thursday at 9:00. Tony was able to write all the checks for Friday. He disliked being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning staff were asked to leave. Kyle took a few minutes to demonstrate how to use the stun gun. No one has volunteered to check it yet. The plan was ready to be executed if I were to be caught. I fully expect to face jail time, but I did not care. Tony DeMarco needed to be humiliated. If I were arrested, I would make sure that all newspapers and television channels received full information. Any advertising like that would severely impact his reputation. He was sufficiently disgruntled to engage in some ill-advised behavior over the following few days. I only returned home to sleep, shower, and change clothes as I had done since that initial day. I had never eaten at home. Finally, Thursday came. I arranged for my truck to run out of battery and for Kyle to pick me up. The floor attendant did not bother the slow workers much, as long as we met our quotas and the quality was good. They left us alone. One thing that would work in my favor is the OSHA requirements for this job. With the appropriate personal protective equipment, including aprons, gloves, and welding goggles, we all looked similar at 8:30. I exited the premises via the rear entrance. The personnel would rotate in their efforts to repair my apparatus. It is worth noting that the facility would periodically experience periods of relative inactivity. However, this did not elicit concern. The practice of using the restroom without supervision was not uncommon. My objective was to create the impression that I would not be noticed. I proceeded directly to the restroom at approximately 9:00. At 10 minutes past midnight, I donned latex gloves and proceeded from the restroom into the office, which was illuminated by a dim light. The desk was positioned to overlook the showroom, with the subject's back to the door. It appeared that the situation would unfold with greater ease than anticipated. A computer was positioned in front of the subject, but he was engaged in inputting data on an antiquated adding machine with paper tape. I approached unnoticed, and upon making contact with the stun gun, the subject's body jerked upward. I then proceeded to turn around, at which point I struck him again. This time, he exhibited a brief series of involuntary movements before becoming completely relaxed. I proceeded to secure him with 2 plastic strips around each leg and 2 around each arm. I had brought an old tie with me, which I used as a headband. He was remarkably malleable. I then proceeded to wheel his chair up to the glass display case. Subsequently, in the morning, when his personnel arrive for work, he will be visible. The hue was a pleasing pink, but I had to use a greater quantity of paint than I had anticipated. The paint absorbed into his garments with remarkable rapidity, necessitating the application of at least 3 coats to achieve the desired effect. I had just enough paint, but barely sufficient for the task at hand. Upon completion, I observed that Tony appeared to be quite cute in pink. I then proceeded to carefully repack all materials used. I anticipated that Tony would awaken while I was decorating him, but he remained unresponsive. Additionally, I planned to remove the blindfold before departing. I intermittently checked my watch and was pleased to meet my deadline. However, I was still concerned about Tony's condition. I attempted to palpate for a pulse, but was unsuccessful. I considered the possibility that the latex gloves I was wearing might have impeded my ability to feel Tony's pulse. I removed my glove and repeated the procedure, but still could not detect a pulse. I continued to try to find a pulse for several minutes, but was unsuccessful. Despite following the method demonstrated on television, I was unable to discern a pulse. I removed the blindfold and touched his eyes with the tip of the pencil, but he did not blink. There was no reflexive response. Understandably, I began to experience a sense of panic. I was able to regain my composure and put on a latex glove. I then reapplied the latex glove and proceeded to wipe away any residual traces of my contact with the subject. I placed the tie in my pocket and proceeded to sever all remaining ties of plastic material. Upon closer examination, I noted the presence of visible marks on the subject's skin, which had been left untouched by the pink paint when the ties were removed. This observation led me to perceive the subject's complexion as somewhat unusual, akin to that of a person with pink skin. I waited another minute to ensure I had not overlooked anything and then proceeded to work. On my return to the store, I discarded all my miscellaneous items, including the stun gun, into the storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was engaged in the task of sewing brake pads once more. Nobody noticed my absence as I left the premises immediately after the shift ended. I informed the other employees of the events that had transpired, and it became evident that they were all complicit. Consequently, I was confident that no one would divulge any information. Freddie expressed great admiration, and none of the other employees appeared distressed. Kyle drove me home, and we both noted the time of his departure. I did not sleep for as long as I usually do, and it was approximately 10 o'clock when I finally dozed off. At approximately 10 p.m., Marcy burst into my room. She demanded to know what I had done. I was perplexed by her question, so I rolled over and looked at her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Tony is dead," Karen said. "I just heard from Marcy. He was found dead in the office this morning." "I don't understand," I replied. "How could I have possibly been involved in this tragedy?" "You will," Karen said. "I'll make sure you pay." This was the second occasion in the last 5 minutes that she had referred to me as a bastard. It was evident that I would not be able to sleep again, so I got out of bed and went to the toilet. I was not eager to confront my wife, so I took a long, hot shower and slowly shaved. I even sprayed on a little aftershave to annoy her. I did not have the opportunity to consume the coffee that was prepared for me. A man with a very short haircut and wearing a dark suit was in the living room talking to Marcy. He informed the police of the situation. It was evident that he was there to investigate the matter. I proceeded to the kitchen to consume my first cup of coffee of the day. Marcy gave me a look that conveyed her skepticism as I sat down in my favorite chair. My uninvited guest also sat down. "Mr. Sir, my name is Detective Darnell Green. I am here to inquire about the circumstances surrounding the death of Anthony DeMarco. Last night, your wife informed me that you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement the previous week. I would like to ask you a few questions. I have no objections to doing so here, but I would prefer to conduct the interview in a more private setting if you are amenable. If you wish to discuss the matter further, I am available to meet at your convenience. Your office is not at my house. I am uncertain as to whether you are amenable to this arrangement." I could not help but notice Marcy's disapproving expression. I was fairly certain she was expecting to be included in the discussion. "I will meet you at your car or mine, Mr. Mercer. I have another engagement, so I will be leaving shortly. I will meet you at the second-floor re-office, room 206. When you exit the elevator, turn right. I will see you soon." Marcy expressed displeasure when I put on my shoes. I did not complete my coffee, so I discarded it in the sink. I then exited the premises with a smile. "I believe you will receive what you desire, honey." "What are you referring to? What is the meaning of Danny?" 10 minutes later, I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For approximately an hour, Detective Green posed a series of questions and I provided responses that were, for the most part, accurate and pertinent. He exercised caution in his approach to the matter, neither ignoring it nor dwelling on it. I acknowledged that I had a motive, but stated that I had not had the opportunity to act upon it. The situation was serious, yet I attempted to maintain a friendly demeanor without being overly aggressive. I believe I may have been somewhat impertinent in my response. However, Detective Green seemed to appreciate my assistance in facilitating his investigation. Despite the lack of further questions, the most intriguing aspect of our discussion was the revelation that Tony had died of a cardiac condition. He had undergone a pacemaker implantation a few years prior, which may have contributed to the unfortunate incident. The stun gun was identified as the cause of death based on the marks on the victim's neck. While the death was regrettable, the detective's advice to avoid leaving town was prudent. He also requested a full account of the victim's activities on the day in question, which was a standard procedure. It was an unusual situation to require an alibi, but it was a necessary step in the investigation. The interview concluded on a positive note. I was gratified to discover that Detective Green was on my side. This information elicited a profound sense of well-being throughout my entire body. I proceeded to consume a meal and subsequently engaged in the act of viewing the news on a nearby television set. I observed a segment that detailed the demise of a prominent local businessman. I noted that the individual in question had no known surviving relatives. I then proceeded to transfer funds from my bank account and subsequently allocated time for a leisurely breakfast. Upon my return, I discovered that there were tasks that required my attention at home. I was not present. It required approximately 30 minutes to relocate all of my belongings to the master bedroom and Marcy's items to the guest room. The guest room was equipped with a single closet and a chest of drawers. I placed all of the items on the bed for her to organize. I examined the telephone in the basement and discovered no pertinent information. I gathered all of the financial documents, including bank statements and insurance papers, and I also retrieved the insurance documents and other important papers. I was gratified to find that the Volvo Marcy was registered in my name, as this simplified matters. I gathered all the relevant items and placed them in a folder on the floor of my truck. I then contacted my workplace and requested 2 weeks of leave. A few hours later, my wife arrived. She appeared surprised to find me at home. It was time to resume control of the situation. I smiled and led her to the guest room. "What is this? Who are you?" she demanded. I smiled widely. I replied, "Please tell me what is going on." "From now on, I will be living in the master bedroom," I continued. "You can take the guest room. I suggest you start putting your clothes away," I added. "Anything that is not in the closet or dresser will be removed." "I have questions. I am unable to fit my belongings in this small closet, and I do not intend to remain in this room. Could you please clarify what is meant by deleted? If an item cannot be stored in a closet or dresser, it is unnecessary. Danny, I am uncertain as to the rationale behind your actions, but I believe it is unlikely to be effective. I suggest you start putting things away. Should you have any further queries, I shall return at a later juncture." This was the third occasion on which she had referred to me as a bastard. I must, therefore, be doing something right, given that Marcy was otherwise engaged in the guest room. I placed her purse on the kitchen table and proceeded to gather together the items are required. I took my time in doing so, first retrieving her mobile phone and then the car keys from her wallet. I then proceeded to remove her driver's license and all her credit and debit cards. I returned the remaining items to their original locations. I retrieved her vehicle registration documents from the truck and transported the Volvo to the city limits, where I sold it to an acquaintance who operated a car dealership. I negotiated a favorable price and agreed that he would sell the vehicle outside the city, despite the outstanding payments. I ultimately retained a few additional items. I was preparing to leave for lunch at Taco Bell when my cell phone rang. I was taken aback by the call, as it was unexpected. The caller demanded to know the whereabouts of my cell phone and my vehicle. I was relieved that she did not resort to calling me a derogatory term again. She was calling from her home phone, this was a promising indication. I could review the relevant documentation upon my return home. I was genuinely remorseful, apologizing profusely. I was compelled to seek legal counsel due to the gravity of the charges I was facing, which included murder. I made a solemn vow to provide you with another vehicle as soon as I was released from incarceration. Despite my attempts at civility, she continued to unleash a torrent of profanities upon our final communication. After concluding the telephone conversation, I deactivated my mobile phone. I had reached the conclusion that renting a vehicle would be a prudent decision, regardless of the eventual outcome of the situation. I was not inclined to remain in the marriage, but that would have to be addressed at a later stage. For the time being, I was the next in line to order. Todd and Terry were present when I arrived. I proceeded directly to my son's room and ignored Marcy. I did, however, glance in her direction on a few occasions and observed that she was not a contented tourist. The boys were eager to show me the models they had constructed as Marcy began preparing dinner. I proceeded down the hallway to the guest room, where I discovered that my clothes had been placed back on the bed. Marcy's clothes, on the other hand, had been relocated to the master bedroom. I allowed myself a brief moment of amusement before deciding against challenging this decision. After all, she had expressed her opinions firmly and with determination. Marcy instructed the boys to wash up for dinner, and I went to the guest room to retrieve my belongings. I found myself contemplating the possibility of discarding her belongings entirely, but I ultimately decided that such an action would be unduly childish. Red Lobster was my chosen destination for dinner that evening. Financial considerations were not a concern, as I still had cash remaining after providing the divorce lawyer with the deposit. The shrimp and lobster combination was particularly appealing, but I decided to forego it in favor of the cheese buns, which I had previously deemed my favorite dish. The combination of lobster and cheese buns was particularly enjoyable, although the latter remained my preferred dish. Having concluded my repast, my mobile telephone rang once more. I was anticipating a call from one of my colleagues or Detective Green, but was disappointed to find that it was my wife. I was at a loss as to how I could proceed to the store. Now we require milk and a few other items. I will take you when I return home. Please arrange for us to go shopping on Saturdays when I am not at work. I would feel safer if you did not go shopping alone. They called me again, I must go. We will speak when I return home. The second call was from Kyle. Detective Green spoke with the entire team individually and as a group. All of these accounts were corroborated. Tom Tingleflaw, the manager, was the most vocal supporter. He asserted that there was no possibility of my resignation from my position. He maintained strict control over his personnel and can confirm that I was present throughout the night. I was aware that I lacked the requisite intelligence to evade detection by an investigator seeking to prove my culpability in the murder of Tony DeMarco. I had the distinct impression that no. I arrived home just in time to put the children to bed. Marcy was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine. I took a cold Foster's out of the refrigerator and settled comfortably in my chair. The television wasn't on, so I decided to initiate a conversation with Marcy. Marcy, how is the plan to turn me into a wimp and a cuckold going? That ended the conversation. Prior to the commencement of the discussion, the subject finished her wine, stood up, and proceeded to her bedroom. I had assumed that she wished to converse, however, this assumption was erroneous. I proceeded to consume my beer and activate the recording device. The initial action of the subject was to contact her sister. It became evident that Marge was aware of the affair between Tony and Marcy and provided her support. It was beneficial to gain this insight. The subsequent call was to Marcy's mother, and the dynamic was somewhat altered. The mother was unaware of the circumstances. Her daughter had persuaded her that Tony was Karen's friend and that I was envious because I had been attempting to engage in sexual intercourse with Karen for an extended period. Tony delivered a monologue on the matter, and I became enraged. She did not explicitly state that I had killed him, but the implication was clear. She then proceeded to contact the cellular telephone company in order to ascertain the possibility of obtaining a replacement for the telephone I had borrowed. However, she was unsuccessful in this endeavor. She subsequently contacted the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, and reported that I had taken possession of her driver's license. The DMV informed her that she was required to report the incident to the local police department. She then contacted the bank in order to request a replacement credit card, but was informed that the account had been closed. The woman was preoccupied. The final message on the answering machine was Karen. Karen only lived a few houses away, so it was unclear why they used the phone instead of meeting in person. However, this turn of events proved advantageous. Two key insights emerged from the call. Firstly, Wally still had to travel from Detroit. Secondly, Marcy was going to avoid making a fuss. Until his arrival the following day, the men and I arose at an early hour. We departed the residence before Marcy awoke. Upon returning in the afternoon, Marcy requested that I accompany her to the grocery store, indicating that she required various items. Given her lack of a vehicle and driver's license, I was obliged to facilitate this request. While she was preparing dinner, I reviewed the recorded data. Upon his arrival, he promptly contacted Marcy. Their conversation was noteworthy for its intensity and mutual trust. He was receptive to her narrative and expressed a desire for retribution. Wally and Tony had a long-standing relationship, and he was determined to maintain that connection. He provided Marcy with his contact information and instructed her to contact him the following day when she had the opportunity. Marcy promptly called Karen and conveyed her excitement. She was a different person. I was astonished at the transformation. It was as if a new person had emerged from within. I was unaware of the extent of my actions other than the killing of her lover before going to bed. I went out to get something to eat. The lawn also needed to be mowed, so I had an excuse to avoid Marcy the next day. Marcy's parents arrived to collect the boys. I was unaware that a sleepover with my in-laws was planned, but I decided not to object. The following day was a school day, and Grandma Wilcox assured me that they would ensure the boys arrived on time. I was keen to review my phone records, but lunch came first. Having skipped breakfast after a brief shower, I went to see Dennis. Marcy did not mention that I no longer ate at home. Marcy and Wally, a plan was devised to avenge Tony's death. The scheme appeared somewhat comical. It is probable that events would have unfolded differently had I been aware of subsequent developments after Marcy and I retired to bed. Wally would gain access to the house through the sliding door on the rear deck. He was assured by Marcy that the door would remain unlocked if everything proceeded according to plan. In that scenario, it would appear that I had been shot during an attempted robbery. Had the assailant discharged a firearm, Marcy and Karen would have contacted the emergency services. At the time, I considered this to be an implausible scenario. I had not updated the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. I gave my wife a sarcastic kiss as I left the house, and she returned it. I had dinner with my parents and spent the evening there before leaving. I borrowed my father's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-shot firearm that would be ideal for today's party. When I returned home, Marcy was already in bed, but she had the light on, so I assumed she was reading. The only call on the answering machine was from Karen, who was bragging about the amazing sex she and Wally had. She had been enjoying herself all day. Before she said goodbye, she promised Marcy that everything would be ready. Later that night, it took me approximately 20 minutes to replace the shot in the shells with rock salt. I had a full bag of the latter remaining from the previous winter. I did not wish to kill Wally, I merely wished to stop him. I was reluctant to kill Tony as well. I was hoping that Wally did not have as poor a pump as Tony. I wished to check the door to the back deck, but I was afraid of Wall. I surmised that Marcy had left the door unlocked. I removed my outer garments and rearranged the bedding. While it would have been pleasant to consume a cup of coffee, it was not yet ready, so I instead consumed a Coca-Cola. I awaited his arrival in my chair with my cellular telephone nearby. He did not appear until after midnight. Upon seeing him on the terrace, I immediately contacted the emergency services by dialing 911 and reporting an intruder in my residence. I articulated that I was in imminent danger to life and limb. I did not terminate the call until the patio door had opened and closed quietly. The assailant appeared, and I waited until he was fully inside the house before firing the first shot. I was aiming for his lower body because I did not want to accidentally kill the son of A__. The first shot threw him back onto the terrace. When the second bullet hit him, he fell off the terrace, breaking the railing. I knew I had not killed him because he emitted a loud, anguished cry, akin to that of a pig stuck in mud. The impact of the shot reverberated throughout the house, causing my ears to ring with a sharp, stinging sensation. I promptly switched on the light, only to find Marcy standing in the living room, screaming at the top of her lungs. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to discern the words she was uttering. I rushed over to assess the situation and discovered Wall. I observed a .22 caliber Ruger automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Marcy was still screaming, so I pointed the shotgun in her direction. She quickly ceased vocalizing and exited the room. It appeared that Wally had sustained an ankle fracture when he fell. Some individuals seemed to be particularly fortunate. 10 minutes later, the first black and white vehicle arrived. There was minimal discussion. I placed the firearm on the floor to clarify the situation. I indicated the phone, and one of the officers informed the 911 operator that everything was under control. They inquired about the presence of additional individuals. I informed the officers that Marcy was in the bedroom. They proceeded to escort her into the living room, where they discovered that they had made a significant error in judgment. Marcy was engaged in a prolonged and profane verbal outburst. I attempted to create physical distance between myself and Marcy while the officers attempted to calm her down. Neither of us was successful. Eventually, a woman in uniform, larger than average, gently took her hand and led her outside. I noticed Karen standing outside with other neighbors. I smiled at her and slowly ran my index finger down her throat. She turned and quickly walked away, which had the effect of restoring my positive mood. The ambulance arrived for Wall. Simultaneously, Detective Green arrived on the scene. Upon seeing me, he smiled, and I responded with a grin. I was not attempting to be insolent, I simply could not help myself. The Amazon cop returned Marcy to the house so that she could change her clothes. She became somewhat more composed after I got dressed. We proceeded to the police department together. I requested that we ride in separate cars, and Detective Green permitted me to accompany him. We did not converse on the way to the center, but he looked at me and smiled once more. It was already light when Green. After my release, I was permitted to converse with the authorities for approximately half an hour. However, I was subsequently confined to the premises for the remainder of the night. I was compelled to consume copious amounts of coffee, a practice that I found disagreeable. I was then transported in a black and white vehicle to my residence. I was somewhat disconcerted to find that the house was not surrounded by yellow tape, as I had anticipated. The property appeared to have sustained minimal damage, with the rock salt failing to penetrate the glass side door. I surmised that Wally was responsible for the majority of the damage. I estimated that it would require approximately an hour to repair the damaged railings. I subsequently collapsed on the bed and awoke. I arose from slumber only after the midday meal. I proceeded to the kitchen, where I discovered my amiable detective perusing the newspaper and imbibing freshly brewed coffee, which I presumed he had prepared during my nocturnal repose. I had consumed as much coffee as I desired the previous night, so I opted for a generous glass of orange juice and took a seat across from him. I remain uncertain as to how he gained access to the domicile. "You are a remarkably resilient individual, Mr. Mercer," he stated, without so much as glancing up from the newspaper. I was at a loss for an appropriate response, so I remained silent. He remained silent, and I was uncertain as to whether he was attempting to play with me or not. He finished his coffee, and his complexion took on a greenish hue. "I need to shower, shave, and get something to eat," he said. "I will do this unless it is against police regulations." "Take your time, Danny. I have the whole day ahead of me." As I walked into the shower, I wondered when he slept. His lunch consisted of 2 large sandwiches with stewed pork. Pork Green even joined me, and we proceeded to wash it all down with beer. Neither of us said a word, and after a while, the silence became unbearable. It was evident that Mr. Mercer was eager to inquire about certain matters, and in response, the detective friend waved to the waiter and ordered 2 more beers. "I've been asking you questions all night," he began. "Now, are you okay?" "Of all the questions I have, the most pressing is this: where is my wife?" "I am still holding her, and I anticipate that she will be arraigned this afternoon." "I have finished my beer." "Your wife's parents have hired a lawyer." I did not anticipate this turn of events. "I have 100 more questions, but the more questions I ask, the more I risk exposing myself. I have decided it would be best to retreat." It was nice to see that Marcy's family. I was not present because I had no further questions for the detective. "However, if you feel the need to unburden yourself, you can start at any time." He took a long sip of his beer and laughed, though not loudly. "One more thing, did you ever eavesdrop on or record your wife's conversation with Mr. Williams?" "I assume you mean Wall." This prompted a slight smile. "If I had such a recording, would it be necessary?" "I am unsure if events will unfold as I anticipate." If so, it would not be of consequence. However, if one of the parties secures a competent legal counsel, a recording of this nature might prove problematic. You are correct. I am merely attempting to streamline my responsibilities. I will ascertain what I can do without the cassette, which may or may not exist. I nodded in acknowledgement. Danny, I believe I should take you home. The boys will be returning from school shortly and they require the attention of their father. We arrived at the residence just as the school bus dropped Todd and Terry off. They approached us and I introduced them to my new detective acquaintance. The interaction was initially amicable, but it took an abrupt turn when Green leaned forward and inquired, which of you constructed the tugboat and which one built the monster truck? Todd responded, I built a truck, and puffed out his chest. Green then asked, did you create the tugboat as well? It appeared that Terry was also proud. Perhaps next time I will have an opportunity to examine them. It was now time for me to depart. He left me standing there, stunned, and proceeded to his vehicle with a conspicuous smile on his face. He was aware of the existence of pink paint. He had my testicles in his grasp, and I was unable to take action that evening. We ordered pizza. The boys never inquired about the whereabouts of their mother after dinner. Marcy's father contacted me and stated that he required assistance in raising bail money. In order to facilitate her release from incarceration, I attempted to be as cordial as possible when I declined his proposal. It is uncertain whether he fully comprehended the circumstances, but at the very least, he was attempting to fulfill his paternal responsibilities. I inquired about her intended place of residence. He exhibited a momentary hesitation before stating that she would be staying with them. The boys and I proceeded to load Marcy's belongings into the pickup truck and unload them from Marcy's parents' residence. We completed the transfer without encountering any significant difficulties. Upon returning home, I observed the following morning, the pickup truck was observed in Karen's drive. The individual in question subsequently disappeared. Marcy did not contact me. I was forced to read the newspaper daily to ascertain the latest developments. I was not informed of any developments. It seemed as though I was deliberately excluded from the loop. There was no trial. Marcy attributed the situation to Wally. Wally, in turn, claimed that she was the sole architect of the plan. Ultimately, both parties sought clemency. Marcy was sentenced to 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Wally received a sentence of 5 to 10 years for attempted murder. Several federal officials were consulted regarding the muffler, Wall. If they had chosen to await the conclusion of Wally's explanation before implementing changes, Detective Green would have been unnecessary and never referenced the tape again. Karen vanished and was never seen or heard from again. My father was pleased to have his shotgun returned and guaranteed that I could borrow it again if needed. He smiled when he said this. I served Marcy with divorce papers as soon as she began serving her prison sentence. She did not object. I sensed she had no desire to interact with me because I had not seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wall. I sold the house and relocated to my parents' residence. I was unable to work or care for the boys independently. My colleagues expressed relief at my return. I was offered the chance to work the day shift, but I declined. I accompanied the boys to the Money Women's Prison to visit their mother on a monthly basis. I waited in the car because their visits typically lasted less than an hour. On occasion, meetings were conducted in an outdoor setting. I was able to park and observe them through the chain-link fence. I did not inquire about these visits and requested that they not divulge any information. This approach proved effective for all parties involved. Everything appeared to be progressing smoothly until I received a call. Hello. Is this Daniel Mercer? Yes, this is he. How are you doing? This is Detective Angela Hawkins. I'm calling about a matter that requires your attention. Green stated that I should contact you to discuss a matter. I am aware of Detective Green, but I am uncertain as to why you wish to speak with me. Tony DeMarco was my brother. I was unprepared for this development, which has the potential to complicate matters further. I believe this is an unwise course of action. I am sorry for your loss, but I am unable to assist you in this situation. I terminated the call before she could respond. 2 days later, she called again. Daniel, I would be very grateful if you could visit me. I need to say something. Detective Green said you're a reasonable person. Where did you want to meet? I would prefer to do this at a car dealership, but any location that is convenient for you is fine with me. It took me a few seconds to come up with something. Meet me on Saturday at 10 o'clock. In the morning, I will take my 2 sons with me to the exhibition hall, where I will meet her. They like looking at old cars, and I felt safer in a public place with them than without them. I was not using them as a shield, but I felt that she would be less inclined to do anything if they were with me. I had no idea what kind of malice this woman harbored. If she was Tony's sister, she was Italian. If she was Italian, she had hot blood. If she had hot blood, I had to be careful. I decided I was preoccupied with my thoughts and felt the need for a beverage. I contacted Detective Green and inquired about the situation. He responded with a laugh, suggesting I meet her and cease my concerns. It was easier for him to converse because he was not responsible for her brother's demise. The Continental Classic was a substantial establishment, boasting a main showroom and 2 expansive buildings in the rear housing vehicles undergoing restoration or awaiting display on the showroom floor. I was taken aback upon our arrival, discovering a grand opening celebration underway. This was not what I anticipated. There were numerous aspects of the situation that I was not yet fully cognizant of. Terry and Todd appeared to be experiencing a conflict between their interests in automobiles and the allure of complimentary items. My initial impression was of the aroma emanating from the popcorn maker, where a gentleman attired in soft boots and a rubber nose was distributing small bags of freshly popped kernels. Situated at a distance was a soda fountain, accompanied by another clown offering hot dogs. It was immediately apparent that Angela Hawkins was present as she proceeded towards me with a deliberate and unhurried gait. Angela Hawkins exuded a distinctively Italian persona, characterized by dark hair, dark eyes, an olive complexion, and wide hips. While her hips were not particularly noticeable to a gentleman, they were accentuated by her height, which was approximately 5 feet 8 inches. Tony, her brother, was notably larger in stature, while her sister was shorter and wider. As Angela drew nearer, I observed a younger, smaller clone standing alongside her. This girl, approximately 10 years old, was an exact replica of Angela, with the exception of her lighter hair and the absence of hips. My interloper was covering up, just like me. We were a rather unhappy couple, both utilizing our children as a form of security as she proceeded to close the distance between us, her hand extended in a friendly manner. Daniel Mercer, I presumed it was quite natural and polite to shake her hand. I have always wanted to say this, similar to the manner in which it was expressed in the cinematic work about Dr. Livingstone. She smiled, yet she seemed somewhat nervous, which made me feel somewhat better. I stood there, dumbfounded, and she continued to speak. "This is my daughter, Carla Todd." She smiled politely back and said his name, but Terry held out his hand to her with a grin. "Carla, why don't you show the boys around while I talk to their father?" I also observed this phenomenon and experienced a certain degree of embarrassment. The sales personnel located on the lower level were attired in blue bowling shirts, which made them easily identifiable. Regrettably, they appeared to be more preoccupied with me than with the customers. One individual at the far end of the building smiled broadly at me and gave me a thumbs up. I returned the smile, although I was somewhat uneasy. Detective Green had inquired about my circumstances. I did not respond, merely shaking my head to indicate that he was not the perpetrator. I am reluctant to provide a detailed account of my life, but I believe it is pertinent to note that Tony was my brother and the sole relative I had. Consequently, upon Tony's demise, I inherited his business. The lawyer took a significant portion of the inheritance, yet I still received more than I had anticipated. I was gratified to observe that someone derived a tangible benefit from this unfortunate situation. While she was elucidating a particular matter to me, I observed that she had pierced ears and a wedding ring on her finger. A small silver cross pendant was visible around her neck, though I was unable to discern it clearly due to my gaze being drawn to her cleavage. I was just beginning to recall the length of time since I had engaged in sexual intercourse when she interjected. "Mr. Mercer, what did you notice?" "It was a trick question," she replied, her smile betraying her amusement. "I'm sorry," I responded, "I was merely admiring your crucifix and told myself to concentrate and look only into her eyes when she struck me on the hand." "Would you like some beer?" she inquired. "It would be a prudent decision to accept." A modest refrigerator was situated adjacent to the table, and she was compelled to assume a crouching position to retrieve the beverages. In a momentary lapse, I was compelled to observe her cleavage, and in the next, her derriere was presented to me in a most compelling manner. She did not elucidate her intentions, she merely endeavored to seduce me. It may not have been her intention, but it was an exceedingly effective strategy. She opened the lid and extended the jar to me, attempting to maintain her composure. We both took a few sips of the beverage in question, neither of us uttering a word. "Well, Miss Hawkins, I'm gratified to see that everything worked out for you. However, I'm at a loss as to why I'm here. It would be prudent for me to return to the group before they begin to worry. Perhaps it would be more convenient for you if I were to be referred to as Angela. Would you be amenable to that? I'm not sure if we are finished here. I'll let you decide." Detective Green said, "Uke." I didn't respond. If I remain silent, she'll proceed more expeditiously. Tony was a malevolent individual. He was a worthless son of A__, and deserved to die. Despite the peculiarity of this sentiment, I wanted to express gratitude. It was a trap set by the detective. Was the room bugged, or was it her? It's plausible that she has a bug hidden in her bra. I was looking at her cleavage once more. Do you have a wire or some kind of recording device? Of course not. Why would I do something like that? I finished my beer, although I remain unconvinced. Perhaps I should venture downstairs to ascertain the whereabouts of the young men. I would not want them to become embroiled in any difficulties. She appeared to be quite confident that there was no romantic involvement between me and Tony approximately 3 years ago. My husband was involved in an unfortunate accident. He was not insured, and the individual who caused the accident was also uninsured. At the time, I lacked the necessary skills to secure employment, and I was responsible for the care of my daughter. Tony was my only relative, so I approached him for assistance. He provided some financial support. He did not contribute to the funeral expenses, nor did he respond to my calls. Are you suggesting that his death was beneficial for you? It is evident that you perceive it as such, and perhaps you should be grateful for the financial compensation. Let us refrain from further discussion on the matter. Angela smiled and finished her beer. Do you wish to avoid talking about this any longer? I nodded and began to pace back and forth in the room. I require your assistance. You are the only individual who can provide me with the help I need. What can I do for you? I am offering you the position of general manager in my company. I must admit that I am somewhat surprised by your proposal. I am not an expert in the automotive industry, particularly in the field of luxury vehicles. I am aware of my own limitations in this area. I have a team of professionals who are responsible for managing the technical aspects of the business. I am not sure what you can contribute to the company that my current employees cannot. Angela seemed a little nervous. She looked down at the floor and then at the walls. Her eyes moved around the room as she tried to find the words to respond. When you accompanied me to the office, my employees' reactions were not positive. Not a single one of them deigned to acknowledge your presence. They all believe that you are responsible for Tony's demise. Not only did you kill him, but you also made a laughingstock of him when you did it. They were all afraid of Tony. They seem to be afraid of you now. Their fear is akin to respect. Do you understand what I'm trying to convey? Do they not respect you? The answer is a resounding no. They will attempt to discredit me in every way they can, and there is nothing I can do to stop them. I lack the intelligence and fortitude to maintain control over them. What is the point of all this? Can I do mostly just be here after a while? We will both be able to learn the business well enough to be able to control what happens until then. I need you to intimidate them. I am a good guy, Angela. That is why Tony and my wife tried to take advantage of me. Now she felt a little calmer. It did not work out too well for them. For some strange reason, I found this funny. I even laughed a little over the next 30 minutes. Angela and I discussed that she had no problem exceeding the salary and benefits that I received at the factory. If things don't work out, I can always come back. However, I was reluctant to do so. I wanted things to improve. Todd appeared unwell when we got downstairs. He had consumed an excessive amount of hot dogs and soda. Terry, on the other hand, was enjoying himself. He conversed with Carr more than he observed the cars. This was a positive indication. Todd vomited in the truck. On my return journey, I was unable to attend the evening meal on Monday. I commenced work and found the transition to be seamless. I was impressed by my ability to rapidly become acquainted with the tasks at hand. I fostered connections with numerous colleagues and soon identified individuals with whom I wished to develop a closer relationship. Glenn's cousin, who wore a blue shirt and greeted me with a smile on my first day, was one such individual. He was a staunch supporter of the business and demonstrated a commendable work ethic. I began to engage in target shooting and discovered that I enjoyed it. I was able to fulfill my reputation as a skilled detective. Detective Green stopped by for coffee a few times, but the conversation was usually light and friendly. I finally encouraged him to open up a little more 3 years ago. One day, I returned home to find my wife in bed with my boss. I physically assaulted him on the spot and threw my wife out. The police department gave me the choice of either quitting or being fired. I was given the option of either resigning or being fired. I had been employed here for approximately 1 week when I was informed that I was being dismissed. I ensured that the son of A__, who was engaging in an illicit relationship with my wife, was also terminated. I did not inquire further about the circumstances surrounding this individual. It was his own business. At least I understood why he seemed to be in my corner. The boys agreed not to divulge the details of my new employment to their mother during their scheduled visits. They made a few comments about the lengthy journey, but they appeared to accept that they had no choice in the matter. I felt it was important for Marcy to see her sons, but I did not do it for her sake. Rather, I did it to exacerbate her distress. I am aware that this is an unethical and reprehensible way to exploit your children, but I derived a perverse satisfaction from it. Angela and I spent more time together at work and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted that I take her and Carla to Noble Grove. For the most part, we just stayed close to home. The living conditions made it difficult to cultivate a romantic relationship. The relationship was challenging. I was interested in a closer relationship with Angela, but it was awkward. I still lived in my parents' house with the boys, and Angela and Carla had a small one-room apartment. Things were going much better than expected. Angela began discussing the possibility of purchasing a house. She spent a significant amount of time on the computer searching for the ideal option. I received my first call when she explained her reasons for wanting a 4. Danny, I believe it is crucial for each of the boys to have their own room. It is preferable to address these issues promptly rather than postponing them. I concur. I promptly recognized that the question was designed to elicit a specific response. I also recognized that Angela viewed me as more than just an employee. The potential for romance seemed more promising. I agree that a split-bedroom plan is a viable option. I do not favor the current arrangement. The proximity of the master bedroom was a source of contention. Nevertheless, I departed from the office and observed a subtle smile on her face. Our relationship was unconventional. We never engaged in sexual intercourse or even made any advances towards it. We never kissed, yet I felt a closeness with her that I had not experienced with Marcy in the 12 years we were together. 2 days later, upon finally divorcing Marcy, we all went to Red Lobster to celebrate. The children were unaware of the reason for the party, but Angela was informed of it later. Back home, the children were watching Pa. Angela cornered me in the kitchen and stood on her tiptoes to kiss me. We were hugging and giggling when Carla came into the room. She apologized and stated that it was time for her to leave. She then informed Terry of the situation and they both smiled. Angela and I maintained our composure for the remainder of the evening, yet I was anticipating the next day's developments. We had a lengthy lunch and subsequently returned home. We both had a considerable amount of pent-up energy to expend. We resumed our work just before the end of the working day. There were numerous long lunches after that, and Angela began to consider the possibility of hiring a home detective. Green came by on a regular basis, mostly just to chat, but from time to time he would glance at the cars. He fell in love with a Studebaker Hawk that used to belong to film critic Roger Ebert. Angela gave him a fair price. Danny, I need you to take me to Marcy. This was an unanticipated request. The boys and I went there less often than before, but Marcy never seemed to complain. There were no apparent reasons for this change in behavior. I am unsure of the significance of this request. I was aware of the words that described it, but the concept seemed to elude me. I am uncertain if you would like me to go with you or if you would prefer for me to simply take you there. It is not necessary for you to be with me while I am talking to her. It was a warm, sunny autumn day when we arrived in Money. The meetings with the prisoners took place on the I parked my vehicle near the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela exited the building and proceeded to the courtyard, where they proceeded to engage in conversation and display outward displays of amicability. 5 minutes later, the situation became even more intriguing. Marcy's demeanor shifted and she adopted a scowling posture while leaning over the picnic table. Angela, on the other hand, continued to display a cheerful demeanor. Marcy suddenly rushed across the table and attempted to grab her. The security personnel swiftly intervened to restore order. My wife re-entered the building, kicking and screaming. Angela then turned and looked at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitor area. She was still smiling when she returned to the car. What does this all mean? My wife is a highly sensitive individual. Angela appeared to giggle to herself. We drove a few more miles and then she turned slightly, tightening her seat belt. I introduced myself and she seemed pleased to see me. As long as she believed I was on her side, everything was fine. I admit that I misled her somewhat at first. What do you have in mind? I informed her that I had traveled from Baltimore to exact revenge. This seemed to please her, as she believed I was seeking revenge against you. In reality, however, I informed her that I was going to exact retribution on Tony by assuming control of his enterprise. I then inquired as to whether it was still possible to take vengeance on a deceased individual. She expressed her desire to learn the specifics, including the time, location, and method. I was aware that she was referring to you, and I became intrigued. I informed her that the process would be lengthy and requested her permission to keep her apprised of developments. She promptly agreed and expressed a keen interest in learning about my plan of action. When I detailed my strategy to her, she was particularly fascinated. She was astonished, distressed, and enraged. I proceeded to elucidate my plan of action, which she found incomprehensible. I then inquired as to her own methodology for my demise. Her smile broadened. I informed her that I intended to do you in, which elicited a further intensification of her mirth. I then suggested that I would sex you to death, which she received with a similar degree of amusement. I had anticipated some degree of indignation, but her reaction exceeded my expectations. We sat in silence for a few moments and then we both smiled. I was gratified by her response. When do you plan to launch this attack? As soon as we get to the subsequently Motel Silly. Approximately 2 months later, Angela and I were wed in a modest ceremony held in the backyard of our newly constructed residence. Angela dispatched Marcy a nuptial invitation accompanied by a brief missive. Everything proceeded according to the established plan. The demise of the groom was expected to occur within a 40 to 50-year time frame. To ensure the fidelity of your second spouse, subscribe to our channel. The following narrative is of a more compelling nature than the preceding one. Individuals under the age of 18 are advised to refrain from listening to the subsequent account.